just love the photographic image. And no offense to anyone who paints, but when I think of, I mean, I like sculpture, and as I said, I like architecture, but I've never been enchanted by painting. The magic of painting somehow is not my favorite art form. It's interesting for me, as you are noting, the proliferation of photography, and so how does that change photographic practice? And so one of the ways it does is that we have for the last 7 to 10 years this incredible emphasis on how the photograph is an object, and whether you scratch into it or you that you make it look like something else, that you're not interested in the narrative potential that a photograph has. And so it sort of operates more like a painting, like an object. And so I think that's a strategy for a couple things. It's a strategy that people who like photography, practitioners, are realizing that sort of the content part of photography is kind of been taken over by the masses. And also that they need to create something that's distinctively theirs, that it's like a brushstroke or a palette, that they need to create a curve or a shape or something that, and usually the work is abstract. And most of the time, a lot of these photographers or artists who are utilizing photographic techniques somewhere within the production of their work is distinctively theirs. And that's a way, again, of calling attention to the unique vision that any artist, regardless of media, has. Where, Ansel Adams had a certain kind of he had his own technique that was specific to him. Sure,
and that involves, I think, you mentioned earlier about taking Cade, one of our previous guests on the show. We had spoken briefly about how people underestimate exactly how much work Ansel Adams was doing in the dark room to turn these images into what we see as finished images. And so, I think, again, I teach art history, and just this past week got to the point in the arc of the timeline where there's the advent of photography, and I talked to them about my students about how photography allowed painting to quit its day job. Painting was no longer about documenting. That photography now takes on that role of documenting. And I think what you see is, 100 years of photography really being, purely documentary. But we see, Stiglitz, starting to, glam onto, what we think of as, the elements of art and principles, in his photography, and being attracted to shapes and color, shapes and values, specifically instead of exactly what he was documenting. And, eventually getting to a point where, as you mentioned, we're now at a place where, photography is now kind of moving beyond, itself is moving beyond that purely documenting, role into, how else can we, we'll let the masses continue to document with photography, but how can we utilize photography, beyond that, right?
So there's, strategies that even if you're interested in content, in a certain way, there are strategies through presentation, through editing, that can still be employed, but you have to, I could name some photographers who make books, and because of the way they define the project, it has a life, and it has meaning, even though it has a lot of content in it, and they're doing a lot besides making a single image to work by itself. So, but it is interesting to have taught all these years, and to start out with black and white darkroom as the norm, and then now digital, and now even we're not even and digital printing, and then whether you even have to teach printing, maybe you can abandon that, or maybe you don't maybe you have a class that's called digital imaging rather than digital photography. So the curriculum changes as the
and even within, I would guess within the next decade, all the wording associated with digital will probably just fall away, right? That it would just it's just how we exist. It's no longer some strange term, but so you're out of RISD. You cease. You finally get that role you're looking for as an instructor. You relocate to Dallas. You're not just teaching. You're also showing your work, right? So, what opportunities? Where did you first start getting traction there?
Well, there's always an interest in the shiny new thing. And when you are part of that shiny new thing, you think that you deserve it all. You don't think, oh, it's just because I'm young or just because I'm using materials in a new way. You think it's because you're great. So there were a number of opportunities that were opening up. Not that if you were half good or something, you could people would support you. So some of the things, I had a gallery in New York. It was called the Whitkin Gallery. And there were really only two really important galleries in New York. This would have been in 1974 to 1976. And that was Light Gallery, which is still now been absorbed into Pace McGill. And, yes, let's leave it at say that. Right. And then Whitkin, and Lee Whitkin picked me up, and I was in a group show, and I was on my way. I was very excited. It was really great. And then he died prematurely. So I did not seek a representation after that. And I can't actually see, this is an example. I think when I was just in RISD, I might have taken my portfolio to him, and he said, yes, I like you. And at a Fifth Avenue, a very important gallery, small space. Right. But, now you can't just take your work to a big deal gallery or any of them. You have to have a letter of introduction and, all this other stuff. So, but the world, it was pretty open then. Then I was in a Hirshhorn Biennial here. I was in a show at Harvard. I had a one-person show at the George Eastman House in Rochester. I was in a small show at the Museum of Modern Art. There were just opportunities, some of it word of mouth, and sometimes you would apply for different things. I had a couple grants. So I was, and then in Dallas I was in a group show at the Dallas Museum of Art, and then I was picked up by Delahanty, which was the best gallery in town. And so for, 5-10 years, there was a lot of things, and it was, getting a lot of interest, articles in the newspaper, reviews, and probably the biggest, most important show I ever had was I had a 2-person show at the Art Institute of Chicago. And that was a big deal for me, and it was great, like a homecoming. It was really great. And it
must have been incredibly surreal, given that origin story, right?
Yes, it was. And so, and I remember that there weren't exactly PR wasn't quite what it is now, and so I remember contacting the Tribune, the newspaper in town, and said, "I'm having a show, and you should know about it. It opens here." And I don't know if I contacted them again or what. And they said to me, we thought about putting one of your pictures on the cover of the Sunday magazine section, but we decided to go with blueberries because Blueberry Festival. And I said, you'll have blueberry festivals every year to do a cover. Do a cover of me. Right. So they did I had a cover of one of my photographs right on the Sunday magazine section. And the Tribune had a nice Sunday night. It was very nice, kind of like the New York Times, a little bit less. And so that was really terrific that I could see that magazine and see my picture, my photograph there. You say my picture, not a picture.
I'm sure your mother got a lot of mileage out of that, right?
Yes. So that was really great. And so, I was doing work and the work I was doing in I did several projects that were mainly documentary. And I never really attempted after to really get my work into galleries very much, especially when I became more, what would you say, Texanized or Dallasized, because when you first come to Dallas for the first 2 or 3 years, you're still thinking of the East Coast. But then I became more immersed and enmeshed in the Dallas culture and what the Dallas arts. That's how you would make your contacts, like locally and things, rather than having to fly into New York and do all those things. So after a while, I really never found a place for my work in Dallas in a gallery, because I thought I would look around and I don't see anybody showing work. I see After Image Gallery carried photographs, but they were all sort of the Ansel Adams variety, and I was more caustic and more sarcastic and more content oriented. I've always loved really worked hard to make the photograph structured really well.
Right.
And then I also definitely, even though there's content, I certainly am aware of the metaphorical power, and that's really what I'm after. So I had said earlier, as we were talking, that I wasn't so interested in poetry. It took me a while to sort of understand that everything can be metaphor. It doesn't have to be abstract, florid language. You can have it. So once I kind of understood that, then of course my goal has always been to take something that's based in reality and move it on to a higher level. Definitely.
So what did that work look? And in that time period, like on your website, the first series that you document is your Waiting series, 1980 to 84. But in that, say like 74 to 80, is it similar to that? Is it black and white? Like what was that work?
Well, thank you for delving into it, because there is a sort of, I was a photographer before I did my hospice series, which was called Waiting. And I traveled in Newfoundland and Labrador and photographed 2 series there that I don't have represented on my website now, but perhaps I will. And I like that work, and it is work that I showed in good places. One of them was a series of photographs of laundry blowing on clotheslines, and they were kind of gestural, kind of abstract, and they were done in the maritime provinces where there's people hang clothes out to dry, and they get
sometimes
beat up
freeze
with the wood.
dry.
That's exactly right. And then the other series was when I was traveling up there for 7 summers. I traveled up through Newfoundland and Labrador on coastal steamers, and I spent a lot of time on boats. And I was a city girl, and so this was a really significant experience for me to be outside for most of the summers, either on the boats or camping. And I had not really known the elements or the sea or the air or the wind. And so the other series, besides the wind-blown laundry, were photographs of people looking out at the water, and a kind of meditative, contemplative quality that would come over them. And so this whole idea of the horizon line, of the elements, and then later on when I did the hospice series, I have people facing their death rather than looking at the horizon line, the infinity there versus another kind. So all of I feel, even though I have work that has, on a certain level, it's a little disparate in terms of subject matter, I feel very comfortable that some of that I have reoccurring concerns, and that
Sure.
and that they surface in different ways. So, but